Events unfold in another world, Horthia. Here dragons lie in wait for prey, hunting relentlessly. The dragon shown is by no means ordinary. An ancient magical dragon, Mikaldra, and its subjugation is marked as legendary. But this time something appeared before it that it did not reckon with. A continuous barrage of mighty fireballs rose up. He is destroyed by a man whom everyone calls the greatest sage. He is the only being on the planet who turns out to be the strongest of all people. Time lapse and the scene shifts to the palace of the leader of the magical guild, the celestial sage Cedric. Cedric exploded with rage as soon as he heard that his subordinates. They are trying to persuade the emperor to stop the declaration of war on the demons. The three subordinates kneeling before him are the leaders of the magical guild, three holy sages. In their opinion, once the war begins, they will no longer have time to do anything. Cedric is not one to be subdued by fear, and since he has already devised a path to victory, it means he is confident in it. The tension rises with every second. The three holy sages press Cedric and again ask him to reconsider the decision, and there is no guarantee of victory. While the conversation continues, Cedric sips red wine and exhales with relief. War is permitted by the will of His Majesty. The only reason the holy sages are there is simple. They know that Cedric is the most influential force in the country, second only to His Majesty. That hero is not one to be easily moved from his place. He asks if they are ready to give tens of thousands of their people to the demons, to shoot them like dirty cattle. The holy sages are not at all embarrassed. They do not care because they select the old and children for sacrifice. This time even Cedric cannot hold back and shouts at them, showing his contempt for such practice. Then he asks why they use magic if they are not even able to protect their citizens. After taking a sip of wine, he introduces himself, the only sage in history who managed to reach the heavenly level, and declares that he alone can save humanity from the demons. Enough talking, now let them call the guardians and move to force. The man will not allow the soldiers to do as they please and will stand aside. But everything is already planned, and suddenly Cedric falls, losing all his strength. Then one of the holy sages reveals, a weakening poison was mixed into the wine. They knew that only this man could single-handedly defeat several thousand troops, and they knew that the emperor went into battle only because of Cedric's power. The holy sage mocks Cedric, pushes him to the floor, and declares that they will destroy him here and now. To save his life, Cedric says, "If I die, you will have to live my life like cattle." Again and again, the festive scene is indifferent, for the sake of the nobleman always being able to sacrifice commoners to the demons, especially old witches and children. Cedric can no longer endure this senseless noise and the prophecies that cover him like thunder. That day the demons will fall and be brought to their knees. And then people pour a little more weakening potion on Cedric's face and whisper that all nobles except the royal court see Cedric only as an annoying obstacle. The consolation from others is this: Cedric manages to call them fools with his last words. In the end, Hammond has to finish with a final blow, and as Cedric feels the limits of his own power. It turns out that magical power mostly stops developing after 40 years, so it becomes extremely difficult to train the soul, the source of magical power. Cedric realizes if he were reborn as a child and given a chance to grow up, even defeating monsters like Darkness Dragon, Light Dragon, and Evil World Tree Effector would be a trifle. Realizing this, he activates reincarnation magic, what he had honed to perfection for 20 years. In his soul, the man curses Ammon and his entire team. He calls his reincarnation only a brief deviation from the path. Later, Cedric opens his eyes and appears as a boy. When he glances at the mirror, he does not recognize his own reflection and shudders at the body that has already manifested, and it is then that he notices the rituals taking place around his bed. As soon as he realized that this ritual was meant to summon the devil, it dawned on him it was no accident. Despite everything, he has satisfied the mission to obtain a young body succeeded. A moment later, and he was about to continue celebrating, when suddenly someone calls him young master and informs him that it is time for dinner. Although he is eager to rush forward, the protagonist slows down, calms down, restrains himself, and manages to get dressed. Eventually, he reaches the dining table where food has already been served, and as soon as he takes the first bite, he is struck by the taste. He continuously asks for more and more every moment, for the third time. His senses sharpen with each plate, and after a few such minutes, he asks the support staff to thank the chef for the dish he prepared. As soon as he asks about it, everything shatters into pieces moment by moment, and they answer him. For him, it is strange to express gratitude. But since he is no longer the same, he says there is nothing strange about it. Praising a person who does their job well is perfectly normal. And he just realized it is not the taste receptors that have improved, The food is astonishingly skillfully prepared. The butler asks if he will go to school the next day since he has been absent for more than 2 weeks without any reason, and adds, as the child of the master's young wife, further absence may result in disinheritance. Cedric notices that there are problems in the household, so he agrees to go to school the next day and asks the butler to accompany him. Returning to his room, Cedric thinks about how to restore the memories of the body he now inhabits. So he casts the magic of sleep and the magic of memory aid on himself. The first memory, how he was bullied at school. It was a group of students who liked his assistive screens. It gets worse when Alfred finally realizes, not everyone loves him not because of who he is, but because of his father's position. The bullies did not quiet down, they continued to mock him and even called his mother offensive names. Despite the pain, Alfred manages to get up, but not for long. One of the classmates kicks him in the stomach. The attack enrages Alfred, and at that moment the bully calls his friends and asks if they want to join. One of them agrees, approaches Alfred, who is sitting, calls him a pathetic sack, and uses him to relieve stress. When Alfred tries to get up, his eyes widen. He sees an adult man who is meeting the bullies. This man is the sensei. Alfred calls him for help, but the teacher coldly replies, they have already received a message from his father, Algren. The message says that students will be graded based on results, and no one at school will make any concessions. Alfred, in despair, tries to prove that this whole story has nothing to do with school activities. But the sensei ignores the pleas and walks away, leaving Alfred alone, completely alone. He shouts for help. This is unworthy of being called a teacher. The sensei only snorted mockingly and let the bullies do whatever they wanted. Alfred was completely confused and could not understand why all this was happening to him. His teacher did not help, so the bullies called him a sandbag. He did not give any resistance. Suddenly he looked out the window. There was one of his acquaintances looking straight at him. Then he managed to crawl to that boy and ask for help, explaining, the offenders behaved completely absurdly and the teachers were not helping him either. He kept calling Charles for help because Charles was his best friend. But as it turned out, that nasty boy also rejected him, saying that a message came from his father that he should not continue the role of Alfred's best friend. Charles smiled when he called that action freedom for him. And with this clarification, he also left with himself that place behind. Confused and abandoned, Alfred remains alone, and in this silence, the cruel laughter of the tormentors can be heard. The cruelty increases every minute. He is beaten by different people, and each one puts all their strength into the blows. The harder he is beaten, the more the tormentors amuse and delight themselves. All Alfred is capable of is just covering his face and protecting it. Even the shadows reflect his suffering. For their final act of insane sadism, they demand that he open his mouth so as to humiliate him once again. This cruelty drives Alfred to madness, and as soon as he returns home, the mania of the devil summoning ritual freezes firmly within him. When the review of memories comes to an end, the protagonist decides to fulfill the young man's desire for revenge. After all, in a past life he himself was the devil. The next morning he goes to school together with the butler, who does not hide his concern about his mental and physical state. This time Alfred boldly smiles and urges him on, before sending him back to the palace again. When Alfred passes by, he notices one of the tormentors. He is sitting on the stairs. The bully recognizes him and throws a strange look. Sheep always wander in herds, so very soon the main villain of this event appears, demanding a silver coin in a cold voice. Their long-awaited reunion banquet dragged on, and another one joins the mockery, begging for a gold coin. Their sinister intentions are immediately visible. They are already advising how to rob Alfred until his father takes control. The protagonist is still cautious. He understands getting into a fight is boring. So he was already about to leave, but he was stopped. And then, just like before, the bald bully started threatening him again. Alfred could no longer endure this story, so he decided to stand up against them all one-on-one. As expected, his bald tormentor snapped. He rushed to catch the moment and strike Alfred right in the face. But this time, the main villain intervened. Tightening the situation, he reminded the offender about the last scandal among the teachers. Despite the warning, the bald bully is set on fighting. Meanwhile, another bully surveys the place, considers how best to act, and eventually leads the protagonist to a cozy, secluded corner of the school. When they are left alone, the bully thanks them for such obedience. But suddenly, the main character's voice becomes eerie. He raises his hand and says that threatening the weak is not elegant at all. This is enough to enrage the balding offender. He decisively lunges at him. But Alfred does not move, remains like a stone as if waiting for the attack. This time, everything is different. Alfred defeats the offender with one move and switches places with him. The hooligans freeze in shock as soon as they realize something is clearly terribly wrong here. Before they manage to make another move, Gelford activates his magic and explosion bursts forward and breaks the offender's neck. The fight ends as quickly as it began. Coolingly smiling at his senseless opponent, the second hooligan trembled in his heart when he asked if Alfred had brought some magical item specifically for this. Alfred, too cold, turned to him, dismissed those words, and declared that he had black magic, honed by his own hand. For that man, it was complete nonsense. He seized his chance, rushed at him like his bald friend, and even called him a loser as expected. Before he could touch the protagonist, he was punched in the face with such force that red blood spurted from his nose. Again, Alfred felt that he had inflicted considerable damage on the troublemaker, so he began to heal on his own. After dealing with the first, he rewound time so the wall became whole again and knew his injuries could be healed. But it was impossible to erase the memories. He felt a little relieved. Even if the hooligan told someone about it, no one would believe him anyway. Finally, as soon as Alfred left the place, the troublemakers stood up. They were just as confused and scared after all. They saw themselves completely alive and absolutely fine. Someone among them was sure Alfred is a poster boy, but he had no evidence. In the end, they concluded it was the illusion magic of the House of Elites. Everyone again had the thought that now he had to pay for it, but the protagonist felt differently. Every time a minute escaped, the memories of the body converged with him, synchronized. At that very moment, someone called him, and as soon as he turned around, he saw his own. The dirty teacher interrogates him, so he is still a first-grade student. The news about his transfer to Class 3 stuck to him from that day. The order was simple: go up the stairs and walk straight to the end of the second floor. But before he moved, the teacher clarified this would be the last time he showed leniency to Alfred. Alfred, without showing a drop of interest in the warning, simply thanked and trudged away. As soon as he disappeared, the teacher savored the moment when high nobility was turned into a miserable state, the fate of a slave. And as soon as Alfred reached the edge of the turn on the second floor, a class appeared before him. As soon as he entered, chaos already reigned there. Not a moment passed before some girl ran into him and fell to the floor. She, a little disturbed by her own pain, recognized the boy. She was completely confused by her own reaction and told him that it was he who had been worrying her all along because she was afraid he might commit suicide. Suddenly, the girl grabbed his sleeve and pulled him along, and in Alfred's head one question after another stirred, so he decided to ask her who she was. She stopped only for a moment, then named herself the class president of Slay Class. Soon they came out onto an open area where several students were doing some work. When the protagonist inquired, he was explained they were picking up pebbles. He barely had time to understand what was going on when the girl already knelt down and asked to join. The first graders were about to start magical training, and the pebbles were needed so that no one would fall on the floor. Suddenly she realized why he was confused and decided to lay everything out clearly. It turned out the class system was a pyramid. The higher nobility sat in the first class, diligent nobles in the second, and those who fell out of this status ended up in the third class or in the slavery class. She added, besides the division by grades, everything was based on points, and if he did not earn enough by the end of the year, he could be expelled from school. The girl tried to complete the task as quickly as possible and explained how to rise all the way to the first class. All these methods boiled down to one thing: feeding the nobility, carrying their things home, and even the pebble activity, because she was involved in that too. The lady was determined to prove her worth to them. She wanted them to understand in the Empire a commoner can become a mage, just like Cedric, who recently died. This statement turned events upside down, and the girl was more concerned about the arrival of the nobles, so the protagonist decided to help them with his magic instead of them. He dug up the pebbles. It was then that nobles from Class 1 arrived, complaining about the stench from the commoners. However, when they saw Alfred among the commoners, they finished him off with mockery, both for his father abandoning him and for losing his noble title. These nobles called him a miserable doomed one, and with every word of theirs, anger surged within him, raising his blood each time. Then the nobility decided to gather for a training session and asked him to supervise them. At first, they released magic as a fireball from their wands and tried to hit the target, while others continuously worked on their training as well. One of them summoned water, and that lady later brought it, but they only needed to humiliate her, so one of them slapped that sweet princess onto the floor, as if they were playing with Class 3 children like toys. That was enough for the protagonist. Their behavior annoyed and bored him. His character felt like a slave in his own country. Alfred picked the girl up from the floor and said that at this rate Class 3 would never catch up with some classes. and by raising their grades, forced them to move to other classes. However, the lady accepted her fate as a slave. Tears sparkled in her eyes, and this confused the main character. The whole system radiated coldness, and he immediately realized the system was rotten to the core. Suddenly, the nobleman fell to his knees and, feeling pain, called for the one responsible for cleaning the place where he was injured. Alfred did so, but the lady took the blame upon herself. The nobleman was furious and relentlessly demanded payment equal to his blood. But she bravely, with tears in her eyes, rejected his accusations, saying she was not even hurt by a pebble. These words hit exactly what hurt the nobleman the most, and he, not understanding the situation, struck to hit the girl in the face. This time, his fist froze in the air and it became clear. Our protagonist had already realized who the main character here was. He not only blocked the blow but also pushed the nobleman back. The latter tried again but attacked with a kick. Alfred again protected the lady and took a kick, did not flinch at all. But the kick was so strong it could have split his head, so the lady asked if he was okay. Alfred was fine, he had already managed to set up the barrier. It was then that the nobleman revealed the idea of this plan is promoted by the one who was previously involved in the attacks, his own offender. The hero realized that it was they who attacked him. But despite everything, she began to spout nonsense about some round of 10 blades. According to its disclosure, the round table of the 10 blades was directly subordinate to the emperor. It was considered a bureaucratic organization that managed the school, preparing the next generation of 10 blades. He was going to inform Alfred that the 10 best students with the highest grades would be appointed as potential candidates for the next 10 blades. In the end, it turned out like this. While they were undergoing training, they would be used as a tool to control commoners and to resolve disputes among nobles. The protagonist was touched by that explanation, who was even glad that he finally found a way to control people at such an age. And he was incredibly eager to find out the names of the 10 blades that had driven him into a corner. He did all this for the sake of the child who became his vessel. His hopes shattered again as soon as that boy refused to know their identity. But the nobleman was more worried about something else: to see Alfred's face again if the protagonist would pass the exam the next day, the promotion to the second year. Again, that noble boy puffed up with self-satisfaction. He considered Alfred a rival who hardly knew magic at all. Every noble looked at the protagonist with terrifying eyes, as if threatening him with just one glance. But all the heroes managed to do was just to thank them. Such an act confused them. So he clarified, the thanks were for the valuable information they gave him. What he planned sounded simple: to defeat them in the promotion exam and then to secure the best grades for himself. As soon as he finished the phrase, the nobles looked at each other and burst out laughing loudly. They did not expect at all that such a worthless boy like him would say something like that, and with such confidence. So, to hit him harder, they declared, even if he did manage to get promoted, he would never become the best student in the school. Again, he failed to understand, so some noble explained, there is a competition for class representation. This exam was introduced that year to weed out the best students in the school. Hearing this, he decided it was about a standardized test, but at the same time, the thought did not leave him. Could they really arrange a show battle to test their abilities? That is why they selected specific people for the competition and relied on ranks to determine the best among them. The most shocking news was that the second and third classes planned to give up their positions. What that bastard wanted boiled down to one thing: our protagonist would not see participation in the class representation. But as soon as Alfred heard forfeit, he abandoned the lady helplessly in anxiety and, turning to the noble, blurted out, what if he passes the selection in the top 3 and beats his classmates so badly that he spits out his guts? None of us and none of them expected such a statement from a third-year student. The gentleman had already heard enough of his chatter. But soon the teacher arrived and stopped them just as they were about to fight, as if he had heard everything from the beginning. Then he addressed our protagonist. If the third grader manages to defeat the first grader, he will recognize the third grader, not the first. He even promised to remove the slave-owning system from the school. It was not a simple matter. In the teacher's eyes, even public shame was still part of a slave's life. After that, the scene returned to the classroom, where the lady lost her composure and sharply asked why he had acted that way back on the playground. Others also sided with her. They knew they would suffer along with him. The main character was calm as clear water, yet still asked if it didn't hurt them when they were treated like garbage during treatment. Despite everything, the students of that class were glad to remain within the lower class because they believed that way they would continue to stay in good spirits. Alfred was too cold-blooded to react to this in any way, but still put aside his affairs and asked if any of them would participate in the interclass competition with him. His classmates began to mock his intelligence not because he was stupid, but so that no one would suspect them of having the stubborn nature that he had. And this made him clearly realize they were worth nothing, for both their hearts and souls had already resigned themselves to slavery. Somehow the lady gathered courage and told him that she was going to join. It turned out that her name was Percy, and no one in the class expected the decision. She was threatened with consequences for disobedience, but she didn't care at all. She knew they were already being held like slaves. Holding that memory in her mind, she decided to rise higher and accept what had happened. Alfred noticed all this and realized her character was not like the others. While the others quietly talked about how to move away from the war, Class 3 was preparing to initiate an attack against Class 1. They recognized the two of them as a burden for the whole class. But they knew for this, 3 were needed. Classmates immediately objected, saying what third person would agree to perform this task. Even Alfred understood. Finding a third at that moment was not easy at all. And yet he suddenly turned to them and declared that he was not counting on any of them. Percy had just agreed. Having expressed his opinion, he stood up and calmly assured them everything would be fine because there was one person in that academy whom he knew. Then the scene shifted to the outskirts of Sword City, to the designated danger zone known as the Forest of No Return. One boy faced a deadly monster face to face. He claimed that he was the greatest genius the Magic Institute had ever seen. The boy easily slipped away from the monster. He had skipped several grades in elementary school and then at 12 years old graduated from the Magic Institute. All his achievements ended with him knocking on the door of the Magic Guild even before finishing high school. But as soon as he entered the apex of the mage's domain, the one who towered there called him Cyrus Taylor and announced the entrance exam had just begun. Confident that he was already at the top of the magical world, he walked full of faith in himself, and on the day of the exam at the guild entrance, one of the heavenly sages, Cedric, stood before him. And as soon as everything started, Cyrus used third-level magic stone missile. He did not hold back at all. He thought his opponent was one of the most powerful sages. The plan was simple: to strike exactly at the moment when Cedric would nullify his spell. This foolish boy came here not only to pass the exam, he came to become the 12-year-old who defeated the guild master. His relentless desire was one, to become a legend. But fate wrote its own script. As soon as Cedric mercilessly shattered his attack with bare hands, all of Curus's plans and expectations fell apart completely. Curus was completely stunned by this display of cruelty. He immediately returned to guard duty and jumped back to a distance from the man. Cedric suddenly stopped the exam and announced his decision. Curus was not admitted to the guild. The reason for the refusal was the immaturity he had carried since the age of 12. The little child, flaring up with rage, protested and said that this was his first defeat and only because he fought with the heavenly sage. Nothing made Cedric change his mind. He ordered to first complete the finishing of studies at the magic school and only then to join the guild. In Curus's gaze, there was nothing left that he could still learn at the institute. His attitude was remarkably confident. To teach the little brat a lesson, Cedric released mana right in front of him and showed how much mana he had restrained in the previous battle. Hearing this, Cyrus immediately realized. The mana began to take the shape of a large football. The control was truly serious. And the guildmaster added that this required colossal concentration, and that concentration itself is the basis of mana control. In the end, all Cedric tried to get from Cyrus was to make him keep mana at his own level to strengthen the body, so small tricks like his stone projectile were just child's play. When Cyrus refused, Cedric said that this was basic, taught even in elementary school. This was even more stunning for the genius, and he flared up with rage as soon as he realized that Cedric was insisting. His magical abilities did not even come close to the simplest techniques. But very quickly he understood something else. Everything Sir Cedric said was the one and absolute truth. With one glance, he saw only that man with incredible magical abilities. Then Cedric left the hall, nullifying Cyrus's magic to 0. After that, Cyrus trained persistently. 5 years had passed, and all this time he regularly attended the senior school of the Magic Institute. During that period, his skills and abilities were almost at the instructor level. That is why he studied directly under the headmaster's guidance. The monster he fought then was a Minotaur difficulty 8 due to its physical abilities. The 17-year-old boy fought the monster using only body-strengthening magic, and to make a real easy prey out of such an opponent. His first strike cracked the monster's shield, but it still wasn't enough for victory. He knew one strike wouldn't be enough, so he led the monster with a series of heavy attacks. He kept in mind the thought that losing in this situation was not an option and struck with such force that a hole was pierced in the Minotaur. Cyrus finally felt happiness because he was improving. But then the air in the zone changed, and within seconds Cyrus was surrounded by a whole herd of Minotaurs. He twitched from shock. According to reports, there should have been only one left. Fear gripped him. His body was already worn out due to excessive dependence on body enhancement magic. Cyrus knew chances of survival were almost none. Yet he decided to take at least 3 of them with him. He did not flinch for a moment and raised his wand. He believed that his magical control did not even reach the level of this boy. Just as he was about to start the spell, out of nowhere a figure appeared and with one strike stopped several Minotaurs. Kyre was momentarily confused by the sudden appearance, but as you and I can expect, it was Alfred, a Kazdrik who scored 65 points for Cyrus. As soon as the protagonist landed on the ground, he called Cyrus by name and said they had something to talk about. But before starting, he asked to clean everything up and tidy the place. 5 years is long, but not enough for Cyrus to forget that exquisite magical control that belonged to the great sage Cedric. As soon as the mud cleared, Cyrus headed to Disney's. And Pro 6 Tagonist decided to tell this story to Prodigy. After some time, the scene shifted again to the school, where Cyrus and the entire Class 3 were. They were struck that the genius of the Magic Institute appeared there. Everyone fell silent as soon as Cyrus began to speak about his special status and told them that, as a research student, he had already recognized the value of participating in all the educational activities offered. The main message was that the president decided that Cyrus would represent the class along with 2 other participants. Returning to the Forest of Uncertainties, Alfred introduced himself as the reincarnation of Sorcerer Cedric, and asked to keep all this a secret from everyone else. The day finally came, the written exam for the second-year advancement test. The nobleman was still swelling with self-love and mocking Alfred. Others were with him. They called Helford a fool for, like a madman, dreaming of reaching the top with such low grades. While they savored their tiny happy moments, one of them appeared by the door and, smashing everything, declared that Cyrus had been assigned to the slave class. They all froze in complete stupor at this statement. And when they remembered that he was the same genius with a special pass, they still could not understand how it happened at all. They knew one thing: since it had happened once, there would be a confrontation of class against class. They were worried about something else: the shift of the academic discipline from second to third. Baldy, having finally thought it all over, reassured them there was no problem with this. In his head, everything was rosy. He confidently believed that there were 2 other fools in the team. This clarification made them breathe a sigh of relief. On the other hand, when Alfred walked down the corridor with Cyrus, everyone froze. In a moment, everyone recognized such a genius among the lower class. Pers was then worried about Alfred, but as soon as he asked what the reason was, everything fell into place. She informed him about his enemies, exactly who he would have to fight in the training battles. There was one more reason for concern: how he performed in the trial battle. If he did not hold out and clear that fight, they would not be allowed to the final team battle. And all this detail did not matter to our hero. In his eyes, failure on the school exam was simply impossible. But Pers looked much more tense than he did, so Alford was more worried about her. At the exam, he asked her to do everything in her power and stated, "This is the only thing that matters." Pers instantly changed her behavior and explained to them that she would not give up even on the written exam. After that, Pers told them that her real name was Lisa Wilson and asked to be called as she was called in the team. The time had come and the exam was about to begin. It was a written exam and Lisa was already nervous. She knew for sure that 40 minutes had passed and 60 more were ahead. The test seemed unrealistically difficult to her, but she decided to give her all because she knew they would leave her behind anyway. When she noticed that the main heroine was sleeping during the exam, she was shocked. After this, she tensed even more, watching how he, as if not recovering from confusion, seemed to give up. Lisa was worried, but as soon as Cyrus looked at the paper, he immediately understood. These tasks were too difficult for a first-year student. But still, it was hard for that boy to believe that Alfred would manage the task in just 10 minutes. Everyone thought he was just sleeping, but on the other hand, he clung to every moment of concentration he could catch, a technique called the Tandon Light method. Completely inspired, Kairos himself passed the exam in a moment and immediately began practicing the technique. His actions once again left Lisa in complete admiration. After the exams ended, time flowed until that very night in the teacher's lounge. The teachers were shocked as if struck by lightning when they saw a student from the lower group scored all the points, even more than the SIR percentage. And the shock was twice as strong because the exam was specifically designed so that no one could score full points. It contained the latest magical equations that the late Cedric had already managed to decipher. The teachers stubbornly refused to believe that a student had pulled it off, so they concluded the test questions had leaked. When they reported to the president, they called it a difficult situation and demanded action against the student who scored full marks. The situation was truly difficult, so the president immediately ordered an investigation even before announcing the results only a day after the next one. But the teachers did not hold back. They continuously pressured, demanding punishment. The president sharply stood up in anger and declared that it was hasty to jump to conclusions immediately. But as soon as the president pondered how exactly to fulfill Cyrus's request to transfer him to the 3rd grade through Alfred, he suddenly realized there is something truly interesting in him. Next, the action moves to the following dado, the location of the personal trial exam. In the arena, the protagonist stood face to face with Kus-sensei and Baldi. He was constantly teased and insisted that the swindler would get a deserved punishment. Thus began the personal mocking battle. Then the teacher called him the worst person on the entire earth, and Alfred instantly realized there was definitely something connected to his written result. It was then that the teacher's face suddenly changed and he told him that he had scored a perfect 100 points on the test. Lacey fell into complete prostration and began to lose control, but the teacher stopped him for a moment to add a twist to the story. Without wasting a second, he accused Alfred of being the one who stole the question form. The teacher threw this accusation at him, deciding that Alfred was trying to earn his father's respect. And the teacher himself began to lose control. He had just thought about what a miserable act Alfred had committed and called it even worse than cattle. But somehow he pulled himself together and told my cow that this was an exceptional case. And during that examination, he allowed him to go too far without any hesitation. He called the forced wet battle a punishment for stealing the exam record from the sacred school. Michael grimaced and brushed off the anxiety as a trifle, but still sighed with relief. He already had a branded agreement. He firmly decided to curse Alfred's existence himself. His chatter was enough, and the protagonist asked him to come out to him to get even. They both laughed as soon as they heard it. As in the teacher's eyes, there remained a chance to find a silver lining, but forgiveness was completely out of the question. Finally, the moment came. The chatter ended. Time to get down to the battle of suffering. My order was crystal clear: crush him to smithereens, leaving no trace. Where the main character sighed with relief, there was nothing left to worry about. Michael rushed at him in the first attack, but Alfred did not even move literally a moment. Because he knew he only needed one hand. Suddenly he realized the body no longer moves. And so Baldi managed to intercept Alfred. The man was burning with the desire to fight. He grabbed the protagonist from behind and tried to perform a curved throw on him with a bam. He managed to hit and he exhaled with relief, deciding that the fight was already over. But now everything was different. The main character got up without a scratch. Baldi tried again to break him, pulling him down to the floor with a strike, but again Alfred's body did not give in, and again Michael managed to land that heavy blow. This strike, like a whirlwind, opened outward the torments of the child's soul hidden in the body. His suffering was many times greater than what he endured at that very moment. Baldi relentlessly attacked the protagonist, and he again and again replayed the fear in his head carved right into his own flesh. Not much time passed. He calmed the youth's soul and promised revenge to settle the score. As soon as that promise sounded, the body moved at his command and he cut off Baldi's attack. His response turned out to be even crazier than he himself could imagine. But the power of the strike was such that it could crush a human skull. One single whip and that fool flew into the air as if knocked out of reality. In the end, he again became just a poster boy carved on a broken wall. Soon that kid lost consciousness and Alfred was mocking him right at that moment. My challenge could not piece together what I saw. I could not believe either his helplessness or that he was unable to move or the agony tearing his body apart. Suddenly Alfred approached him and Michael began to beg for mercy. He was completely paralyzed by defenselessness. Alfred glanced at the teacher and told Bedvi that he was waiting for the final whistle. Meanwhile, the teacher trembled with pure fear, and the protagonist was already preparing to deliver the final blow. But as soon as Alfred raised that filth for the attack, Michael, all in tears, burst out with a pleading cry, "Mercy." But since he deserved nothing, Alfred delivered the final blow. It was so painful that it broke my ribs. As soon as Alfred struck, he aimed the attack at the mystical circle forged inside the back. Its sole purpose was to steal the magic from the sorcerer forever, a technique that even the king's elite mages could not master. Alfred knew the boy came from a prestigious line of battle mages, and he decided to teach him a harsh lesson with his own eyes by snatching his magic away. The protagonist did so because from the memory of his vessels he learned, the fools mocked the boy because of his magic. There was nothing wrong with this. Everyone knows that meritocracy can be a ruthless beast, so he deserved it. Then the scene jumped to the next day. Everyone froze in front of the scoreboard with each person's scores. The nobles could not believe their own eyes when they saw that Alfred scored a perfect 98 points. Soon one of the nobles informed them, after the battle, Michael would soon be transferred to a medical facility in the capital. Their chances were melting away. It was becoming harder and harder to believe in it. While they argued incessantly and spread chatter, Alfred outside pretended as if it did not concern him. He knew they probably wouldn't have enough words, and it was not necessary for them to understand anything at all. Suddenly he felt a pang of guilt, so he forced himself to clarify. A wise man like him should not interfere in these pathetic fights. And since he had promised his ship, he intended to make them pay for what they had done. His target 5 people who so far no one had noticed. He knew he needed to quickly find the next contender. After some time he spoke with Lisa, and she immediately became confused upon hearing that the boy ended up in the hospital after yesterday's training fight. Alfred explained it as the law of karma. But these words were not enough to calm her down. She burst out shouting, venting her irritation. How did it happen that she was left alone with Alfred in the shooting range? She needed to hear confirmation that she was passing the target test, but before the protagonist could say a word, he was called from behind. Then the nobles from Class 1 arrived. They came to the place to see his pathetic performance live. From his reports it followed, the examiner refused to disclose any details of the match. So again, Noble accused the main character of slipping drugs to Michael and because of that, scamming him. In his eyes, no one of the level of such a nobody as he could have defeated Noble so easily. Finally, it became clear why they were urgently called to the shooting range. The reason was revealed. It was a site prepared by Class 1 to make them look like fools in front of people. The aristocrat savored the moment of his life. The protagonist walks by and they even tease him. Alfred realized cheating was suspected on the final exam, but Lisa was worried about the shooting targets. The hero did not worry. He knew that for any tests, only accuracy and strength are needed. And with such relief, he asked her how their wet battle with Cyrus had gone. Everything was clear from Cyrus's reputation. He declared victory even before the battle had begun. Moreover, it turned out that she was the winner as well. In the middle of the arena, she blurted out to him that she might not meet expectations. And Alfred, adopting the hero's pose, assured her there was nothing to worry about. He and Cyrus would handle it. Lisa was too inquisitive. She wanted to find out as much as possible about the main hero because she felt something otherworldly was happening with him. All she desired was simply to see him. Alfred dismissed the targeted shooting as a delusion. In his eyes, there was no point in hitting your targets if there was neither defense nor means of revenge. Suddenly, Cyrus intervened. He picked up his words, agreed, and added that Alfred was too fixated on the truce. In fact, he meant something else. The director had ordered him to set an example before they could take aim. Cyrus understood. Among the crowd of spectators, the genius was being pushed to show his strength. And he decided that it was a conspiracy, a trap designed to hype up a spectacular act. Asking such a genius as him to break a wall that was impossible to overcome meant humiliating him. Another moment and the exam was about to begin. The nobly came only to witness Alfred's suffering, but something more worthy awaited them. The competition was between a genius and the most mediocre of the mediocre. Eventually, the genius made the first move. He began aiming directly at the wall and launched a gigantic firewall. It definitely hit the target. Everyone shuddered as soon as they saw the true power of Cyrus and immediately understood there was no chance against him. Everyone was amazed. How could a child like him manage to grasp the 7th level of magic? Even Alfred was stunned, because this was a tier reserved for the elite division or for the academy leaders. Even during that attack, the special target with magical immunity simply completely disappeared. The protagonist got a second chance to demonstrate strength, but he still did not understand to hit him or not. On the other hand, Zenati was bathing in Alfred's misery. And again, if he had just thrown a tiny fireball, it would have been funny. But the protagonist heard all this and raised an aura around himself of a completely different level. Deep in his heart he knew, if only he could make them see it, everything would be turned upside down. As if he had already calculated everything, he just released his magic. The director was completely stunned to see an incredible amount of magical power. What he had cast turned out to be the magic used to make the meteor fall. But the nobleman betrayed the idea as soon as he heard Alfred's magic fail with a loud crack. He was already about to laugh, but the joy lasted only briefly. From the blue sky, as if from nowhere, they suddenly noticed a meteor falling. With precision to the length of the trajectory, that meteor was aimed right at the target. The director was still in a shock stupor from what had happened, and the noble scum stubbornly dragged their own. It's simply incredible. This meteor not only hit the target, it destroyed the very earth. Lisa had suspicions but could never have imagined it would go this far. As a student, Cyrus praised his master's techniques. When the meteor fell, he felt the magical power inside it. And even this was not enough. Then Ulfur said to him, if the meteor were truly its own essence, the academy itself would have turned to dust. Lisa trembled from what she heard. Those talks sounded simply incredible. And the deputy headmaster wondered, could any student master the 8th tier of magic? It seemed to him that this was only 20 of the true power, but still it equaled the peak might of the head of the school. On the other hand, the nobles gathered to mock him. They could not get involved in the fall because they themselves were in their own pit. One called to lure him into a trap, but another suddenly realized this could not be a trap. He felt the boy was truly so powerful. This man trembled with fear and tried to run away all the way to the hospital. But the most disgusting thing was something else. He decided to tear off the face in the mask from Alfred. After this, the frame was transferred to the imperial capital of the magical school thanks to the Healing Magic Rehabilitation Center. As soon as someone opened their eyes, it became clear. It was the bald scoundrel Mikkel who was thinking about his own trouble. As soon as he realized he was in the hospital, the sufferings from the last simulated fight still flashed before his eyes, flickering like an elusive memory. He needed time to come to terms with the fact that he lost the match as a member of the prestigious magic family. Only one thought spun in his head, to make Alfred answer for his actions. He was even ready to pressure the academy through his old man, but as soon as he tried to get out of bed, something evil swept through his body. A lady entered there and addressed him, young sir. She was accompanied by a doctor. Michael recognized the girl. It was Emilia, and told her that he wanted his body to heal as quickly as possible to knock Alfred to the ground. But the doctor objected and bluntly said, it is impossible. His refusal meant nothing to Baldy, and he decided to get out of there. To make him understand properly, the doctor ordered him to look at his own legs. They were weaker than even a thin plank. Everything that burst out of him were the wildest flashes of memories of that battle. The doctor also said for him to live a normal life again, he would have to wait 6 months. But no sooner had he finished speaking than the stubborn Baldy again began demanding to be released again and again. This time Amelia stepped forward to stop him, and his temperature rose so much that he began to threaten. He declared he would kill them if they stood in his way. Neither the doctor nor Amelia flinched at all. He took it as a personal insult and tried to strike with a targeted second-level spell Ice Needle, but everything went to waste. Nothing happened, and at that moment the magic was not cast. Only then did he realize that the doctor had already cut off. Devastating damage to the magical scheme was found in his back. Even the doctor was completely stunned and eagerly wanted to find out at what level of mastery this sorcerer stood. At the end, he solemnly added, since then my bell is no longer able to control any magic. As soon as he fell silent, Amelia added, they are a family devoted to the craft of magic. Lord Pan announced his decision. The young master Michael would be stripped of his status and the title of eldest son. He had already been expelled from the academy. Under such circumstances, my call would take the full brunt of public attention and meticulous scrutiny. The next statement completely shattered Baldy's hope. From then on, he would never be released from this estate. Everything happened too quickly. Mikkel did not have time to understand what was what, so there was only one thing left, to ask the doctor to fix his problems. He still did not give up the thought of how to become the strongest, so he lunged at the doctor, preparing to strike him. As was fitting, he stumbled right in the middle. Back pains twisted him like a vice. The doctor immediately asked Amelia to bring some anesthesia, and Michael was in tears as he went through this torment. But as soon as she rushed out of the room for the medicine, she saw several students from Class 1 eavesdropping on their conversation. This nobleman could not come to terms with what was happening. The only thing he could think about was the protagonist's face and the trembling fear of the devil's revenge. He was lying on the floor, and Charles confirmed that it was a noble sphere. He also said, "Everything is falling apart and turning into a real mess." Then the nobleman finally realized the hero conducts wet fights only as a cover and intends to simply send them to the hospital. But on the other hand, someone else was confused by Alfred's sudden increase in power, and Charles explained to them, Alfred's family comes from a legendary line of sorcerers. The only clarification concerned his sudden awakening of genetics, while others could not digest the awakening. Charles told them the backstory of the current deputy leader. Supposedly, he is from a family attributed with connections both to the dragon god and to humans. Judging by those whispers, the dragon god could have suddenly awakened within him. Other nobles did not want to believe that such a thing could happen to a nobody like him, but in any case, they knew they had to devise a strategy to defeat a monster like Alfred. They were not going to end up like Michael, so they had to prevent that man from stepping into the deceitful battle. As soon as he voiced this, the ugliest of all reported, "His father is the lair of the serpent, so he will be able to pull this off through a high-ranking representative from the Emperor's intelligence agency." And Charles confirmed the same noble connection that the father had with the Assassin's Guild. Then the scene shifted to the Assassin's Guild. There, some man was explaining to the nobleman that an 8th-level sorcerer cannot be a student. If it were so, he would already know. The protagonist is capable of reaching the level of a court sorcerer. The nobleman became excessively angry and began to utter hideous nonsense about the Guild of Assassins to convince him. But when the guild member took it as a personal insult, he repeated again that it was not such a simple task. The shocking incident lasted but not long. The guild members changed their attitude. He asked the nobleman to enter negotiations while I show him what can defeat him. It was a slow poison that slows down the use of magic, and its only downside is the loss of magical ability. This assassin wanted the young lord to force that man to drink it. As soon as the boy heard about his own inability to perform magic, he immediately ignited. His imagination unfolded fully, to the point that he added the option to remove him as well. The assassin was about to ask about the price, but before he could open his mouth, somehow everything started moving on its own. Wealthy children threw gold coins before him, the clinking echoing throughout the place. These were the funds left after the treasure gifts from their estate treasury were sold 2 years ago. Eventually, one servant treasure, and when a commotion arose in the estate, he escaped without any obstacles as if he were truly the eldest son. Tincture by 50. Eventually, one servant treasure, and when a commotion arose in the estate, he escaped without any obstacles as if he were truly the eldest son. Tincture by 50. This appeal was a bet in advance. He wanted him to become their highest level client as soon as he became the head of the family, and finally, he sealed the deal. And then he also thought to knock the scoundrel down to death with that tincture. After the scene switched, Alfred was visible. He was savoring the food. And Lisa froze in amazement when she saw that mountain of plates he had already devoured, as if he were experiencing the most exquisite banquet of his life. After he had finished the feast of dishes, he was already reaching for luxuries after coffee. But he hadn't even moved yet when a nobleman approached him and asked for a little time. Alfred could not stand such interference. And then he told him that he had brought a cup of tea to sweeten his thoughts. To make everything seem easy, he added, "I came to apologize." Alfred did not feel any discomfort about this and asked how I was doing with the call. Hey, sipping tea, he told him about the loss of the word shame in his vocabulary. This nobleman was too pleased watching that man fall into his pit. And finally, he reveals the truth. He ended up there because he found out who exactly were the candidates for the 10 swords of the Round Table. He knew the candidates would fall under the jurisdiction of the National Intelligence Agency. The protagonist was eager to learn their names, but the nobleman refused to disclose such information and precisely in such an unfortunate place. Then he asked that man to move there to the best place for this conversation. As soon as the area changed, a whole pack of mages took the noble under protection. And he still couldn't understand how it all fits together. It didn't make sense in his head. Did he say something harsh about the trial exam? Then the nobleman clarified. His fault was thinking about revenge against the highborn nobleman. He continued mocking Alfred, reproaching him for lacking noble blood. Allegedly, his own parents abandoned him to the status of a commoner. Alfred had to stand guard and tell him his sorrow, and so he got stuck in this role, while the nobleman only chuckled, seeing how he maintained his bravado. But he was still sure he could not compare to the power of the magnates. And that is exactly what he insisted, because he himself was a great nobleman. Supposedly, being a nobleman means being able to bend the world as you wish. The protagonist was no less worried about those scoundrels standing here to stop him with money and connections. The nobleman was confident in his own, and then told him that the coffee he had just drunk was laced with something. As befits a man of honor, Alfred laughed mockingly at the pitiful state of the nobleman, and told him that he would not make the same mistake twice. In a moment he neutralized the poison, and immediately recognized the men there from the Guild of Assassins. After the protagonist learned about this presence, he understood. Only one of the top tier could have given the order to send him to be killed. Again the nobleman froze in surprise. He knew it was a trap and still walked right into it. He replied with a smile that there was a certain theme behind all this. The nobleman still didn't get it, so Alfred laid it out clearly. The theme of the fight, to wipe out the ruffians, fits perfectly with the afternoon training. As soon as one of the assassins stepped forward, he lunged in a moment to finish Alfred. As expected, he blocked the strike without any extra effort. Then he unleashed his strength and shattered that man's bones to pieces, and the protagonist was too cold to stop it right there. It didn't take him long to exterminate more than half of the assassins. He fought relentlessly, clearing his path, and did it so easily, as if everything was falling into place by itself. The assassins tried all techniques to sneak up from behind, but each time they were defeated. His pure strength was enough to knock down every one of them. When it was all over, the nobleman couldn't believe it. Some mortal who couldn't even control magic went against a member of the Assassin Guild. Clarifying, he stated that the latter had perfected the martial arts of the East, and the skills he used belonged to the realm of the divine. Then the main character finally realized the nobleman was the only one left standing. So he struck him and himself. Shortly after, he showered the opponent with a whole series of blows until the nobleman began begging for forgiveness. As before, he had not a shred of pity for the enemy, so he continued doing his job, making him suffer. Everything was going perfectly while he was delivering his first strikes. The nobleman couldn't keep his eyelids open. At that moment they closed. Finally, when he was already on the verge of falling to the ground, the hero caught him and used his advanced healing magic to heal the body. That act again left the nobleman completely bewildered. He could not understand why the man was doing this. He did not understand why, just when the man was on the verge of losing consciousness, he was given some relief, as if he held some grudge against him. The first round was revenge for all the trolling the nobleman had endured at the academy. In fact, this was not the end, yet the second round was just about to begin. The second round would end in a moment, but he had already successfully pinned this man to the ground. And yet, after that brutal attack, the man was still not satisfied. So he used 10th level teleportation magic. Then he was teleported somewhere in the mountains. As soon as he landed, he immediately realized a lot of time had passed since his last visit to that hideout. After the attack he had just endured, it became clear it was a strike doomed by the guillotine of death, black serpent's venom. He considered the circumstantial evidence flawless and he thanked him for the files from his past life for the information received. He knew if it was the same man he had imagined, he would act quickly again. The hero suddenly understood everything. Before him was a person who could truly be trusted. Several days passed after that scene when the Philadelphian nobleman arrived at the Guild of Assassins to ask the owner to remove the protagonist. In a crazier frenzy, he ordered a guild member to ensure he was given suffering as much as possible. The man was about to say something in response, but at that very moment there was a knock at the door. Almost beaten, he barely made it there and began begging his master to come outside. They were already surrounded by palace knights. This assassin, having just heard what was said, held his breath and froze in fear. The messenger was about to add something else to his speech, but he was immediately thrown out. Only two could hear the voice of the man who introduced himself as Theodore, the one honored to command the royal palace guard. The assassin instantly understood what was happening and quickly changed the subject. He called himself a merchant from the guild who trades groceries. The captain was no fool, so he immediately sensed this place was definitely not for selling wheat and fruits. To figure things out faster, he immediately announced the premises would be searched. The guild member trembled with fear and he thought the information had already leaked, but he asked him not to panic. There was no crime in that room. He knew one thing: all drugs were underground, so as long as they could keep the underground secret, everything would be fine for him. But fate had other plans, so the first thing the captain asked to investigate was a hidden room in the basement, concealed right below. That boy knew everything. The knowledge was accurate and he was nearby, and the child still did not understand what was happening. Then the assassin told him that it was all over, he would die right now. The nobleman heard the same. The boy choked with fear and asked for some time to explain to them. He was the eldest of the Shumlet family. The captain immediately felt that this name sounded as if it carried weight. The nobleman thought the captain was afraid of him, so he asked to pretend nothing had happened. As expected, the captain suddenly changed his tone and agreed. He could do that if he wanted the father to be arrested. He wanted the boy not to flaunt his status too much. And then he introduced himself. Supposedly, he is the one who reads the atmosphere in court. It all boiled down to one thing: this is a crime, and throughout his investigative career he never wrote a single lie. And he also added that his father knows what he does, so he will probably be recognized as a criminal. He wanted to convey a simple idea, a classic case to cut off the lizard's tail. To bring what was said closer to the truth, he said that this is the fastest way to settle a family quarrel. As if the entire court hall was a den of vipers, so when it came to families and their taste, they still had to break all ties with them. In the end, he concluded that a contract for murder is a serious crime, and therefore, there were no VIP cells in prison. From the captain's lips, it sounded too cold, and the nobleman still trembled just at the thought that his connection would be cut off. He snapped, "There is no way out, absolutely impossible." Meanwhile, the killer asked him to calm down so as not to make things worse in court. In the end, he could no longer change anything, only left to accept what would happen. He managed to achieve only one thing, that handcuffs were put on him and he was forced to walk alongside other criminals. When they left, the captain could not understand who exactly the man was who held the documents on his desk. He remembered restraint and sophistication in how the papers were folded. It was from the same person who was once his friend, but reality did not allow him to believe that it was true. Next, the scenes moved to the academic hall. The nobleman's friends shuddered as soon as they learned that he was captured by police knights. The news was confirmed by Charles along with his expulsion from Magic Academy, but the worst part was that he was disarmed from the Shumlet family. Then they both felt only two remained. Michael was already cut off and Chad was already arrested. What they came up with after that was simple and terrible. Alfred cornered them. They knew in advance there was not a single way left in life, so there could be no doubt Alfred's power was real. Charles understood there would be no mercy against them. He would come for revenge. So he ordered the others to keep the defense ready. They knew a few people, the coldest thugs, and were figuring out how to lure help from them. At that very moment, one of them whirled past. The nobleman approached exactly the person they needed. He rushed forward to talk about the confident slave and asked him to take everything upon himself. The scoundrel immediately realized it was about Alfred, so he refused without hesitation. He had heard rumors that Alfred even subdued some professional killers, which meant his entire team had already decided to stay away from this person. After that, the scoundrel vanished instantly as if he had never been there. But not much time passed. Two other nobles began to quarrel among themselves while Charles kept a cool head. At first, he thought both were fools and did not even suspect that everything would turn out exactly like that. He did not care about his status at school, because at that moment his two comrades were completely helpless, so he himself was eager to find a way out. He pondered everything for a long time until he froze again and thought, was that effect Alfred went through because he grew up in an environment where words alone were enough for desires to move and be fulfilled. Suddenly, one of the nobles remembered, if they lose in the show battle, then they would have to whip the classes with the slave in tandem. Charles had already caught their chatter, so he instantly ended the conversation and led them to the dining hall. Both decided it was the best place to think over the strategy against Alfred. As soon as Charles imagined the opponent as a monster, he was overwhelmed by panic, and he became too concerned with the two men he had to deal with. For now, the scene smoothly shifted to the dining room to the lunch hall, where the third grade was preparing food for the first grade. Suddenly, Alfred noticed a napkin on the table and asked Lisa to fold it nicely. She could not understand how exactly he did it. Not just with one napkin, he folded them just as skillfully for every table, for all without exception. Lisa truly considered it exquisite. Suddenly, someone sneaked up from behind and called him friends from the third grade. When Alfred turned around, the director was standing behind him. The hero was glad that he finally came and felt the best moment for their move had come. He did not waste time and asked the director to consider his proposal. Even before the conversation, what exactly they discussed was not revealed. Everything remained a secret. Before agreeing, the director asked for some time. The decision could not be taken lightly. He stepped away, and Alfred thought that the preparation for them was already completed. At Magic Academy, while the scheduled staff meeting was ongoing, the director explained, just like in the last exam, Alfred passed it with excellence and with results that no one in the academy had seen before. To find out his true value, he sent a messenger to the royal capital for a magical trial and evaluation to check how truly exceptional Alfred was. After that, he revealed everything and asked Clive if he promised to swap his class position if the third grade won. Clive wiped his glasses and clarified, it was just an exchange of words, he never meant it. But despite everything, the director still thoughtfully considered that swap under any circumstances. It happened suddenly, and the director added, the 10 swords of the round table are determined only by abilities, and status connections mean nothing here. Besides, he knew rumors were going around that the class management policy was unfair. After this, the director told Clyde about the secret conversation between him and Alfred. When Alfred told him that Clive took nobility as the standard, and that in school it was inelegant, he wanted to do it himself, just at that moment to write the documents about the exile of that man. Clive twitched when he heard that man call him by name, and the director added, if the result of the battle reshuffles the classes, then the fate of the head of grades will fall on him and he must answer. Clive was still holding on to the pain. Alfred shattered all his previous records like a comet, so he already knew no ordinary student from class 1 could defeat him. He himself knew this, losing means exile, so the disaster had already begun. He was even more furious because he was convinced that he came from an elite family. Because at that age he had already crawled to the top of his group, he was supposed to be given the role of the main candidate for the next chancellor. He still could not understand how, damn it, everything had gone so far. When Clive left the room, he ran into Charles. A conversation immediately flared up between them. Clive said there was something they needed to discuss. He without hesitation got to the point and explained that they were both in trouble. Clive himself could not believe it. He definitely did not expect Alfred to reach such a level. Charles had just informed him that they were granted autonomy on campus as candidates for Round Table 10 Swords. Clive looked at him stunned and immediately cut off, do not discuss this. Charles knew it was better to keep silent because if everything continued like this, they would bring destruction upon themselves. His proposal was a simple scheme to turn intention into war. He was going to intervene in the self-governance system of the academy. And he understood this, without entering 10 Blades, nothing would work out. So he planned to use all available means to start an assault and wipe Alfred and his team off the face of the earth. Then the action moved to the student dormitory of Magic Academy, where the ordinary students lived. It was Lisa who saw a dream from the past, once her sister was secretly taken to the estate of some grand noble. She heard that it all began when the Duke was walking incognito through the streets, and even as a child, Lisa still felt it, though vaguely. Lisa pondered and joyfully decided for herself, her sister would become the Duke's wife. But the sister there was neither good nor happy. A child could not comprehend all this at once. She only said goodbye, and as expected, it all ended badly. The sister was used as an instrument of pleasure, and the Duke's ugliness finally made itself known. The sister had to endure the insane jealousy of the Duke's lawful wife and cruel tortures of revenge. Everything turned out even worse, and Lisa remained in blissful unawareness, untouched by the truth. Lisa waited for months for the first letter from her sister, and then after years came the first and last message. Lisa rejoiced at the letter. But the content told a completely different story. There were several gold coins inside, sent along with a commotion, and it was reported that her sister would not be given in marriage, she would become a maid. She believed that they were trying to sweep everything aside with a pitiful compensation for sympathy. All she could remember then was the torment and suffering of her older sister. Nothing changed afterward. As soon as she immersed herself in studies at Magic Academy, everything remained the same. Nobles were nobles and slaves were slaves, and she was taken away just the same. Within her own daily schedule, she said goodbye to the image of her sister and set off to the academy. At the very first meeting, she ran into Alfred. He greeted her with good morning, and they both went together. But the girl decided never again to think of herself as if what belonged to her could be taken away. The day finally came. It was time for the last rehearsal duel in the trial fight. And intending to become stronger, she firmly decided to give everything. On the other hand, a message was already hanging on the bulletin board. Someone had posted it there in advance. And Charles had already conceived such a matter, against which even Alfred would be powerless. Lisa became even more determined to do everything as best as possible in the three-way fight to present the very trio tomorrow that her next day would expect. Alfred felt her stubbornness and tried to calm her down. He said that as long as he himself and Ciros were nearby, everything would be fine. Lisa knew from the very beginning, Alfred did not consider her in the winning combination. So it turns out she was there only to plug the gaps. She understood better than anyone, against two geniuses, and simultaneously at that, an ordinary person like her would have to fight, and with each step it would get harder. Thanks to the fact that they knew their weaknesses, both entered the classroom and immediately saw that Zero was standing there. He came exactly there, bearing bad news right into the very heart of this moment. And then they revealed the rules for the match had already changed. Now they would have to fight inside each block, and the finals would be determined by the average win percentage. They understood this was a conspiracy of the nobility because none of them wanted to go headlong against Class 3. Lisa was on guard for a sudden change, so Cyrus told her, "This is probably the rigging of candidates in 10 swords." Cyrus knew if the root of the plot is 10 candidates who are depicted in 10 swords, the rules are easy to rewrite. Alfred realized that the attachment to the average win rate turned out to be somewhat unclear. Cyrus further added, "The lowest percentage for advancement there is 80. Since only 2 could win the fight, they already knew, in each match there would be 1 defeat. Lisa's suffering had no end. She felt it was her fault, as if those 2 did not advance further. With fury, she incessantly repented and scolded herself, but Cyrus immediately asked her to come over. He had something he wanted to show her. She was taken to the laboratory and told that magic is something intertwined with the soul. It was known everyone who has been in both life and death has more magical energy. Cyrus presented her with a potion called Shinpins, a deadly poisonous drink. This technique could enhance magical power only once in a lifetime, depending on the level of success. Everyone always strived for resurrection from the dead, approximately after 5 years of training, because the risk of dying was too great. Cyrus tried his best to encourage her and guaranteed that with him she would not fight against her peers. Suddenly he changed his tone and said that this was only a prelude. After that, he asked her to return back to the class. Lisa was not a fool, so she understood everything and said directly, the only reason he brought her there was to make her drink this. Cyrus is not one to be rushed by orders and forced to ask her to go to her death, but Lisa knew the truth. If she continued at that pace, it would simply be impossible for her to survive. She knew the academy was already overflowing with nonsense, and if she did not become stronger, the future would continue to slip away. Because she truly found a person who challenged this senseless absurdity and now was firmly determined to walk that path alongside. With all this understanding, she knew in advance she needed to do exactly this. Immediately she drank the potion and Alfred and the others froze in shock. She did this to stay steady and become a true comrade to them. As expected, as soon as it happened, the girl fainted and Alfred managed to save her before she fell. Zeros called his act a bit soft-hearted and then asked Alfred to return F. The mortality rate from the potion dropped from 50 to 0. The protagonist resisted and retorted, he also has his limits. He knew perfectly well, for the medicine to have the desired effect, they would have to invest in long-term healthcare. But in the end, he called it complete nonsense and reduced the mortality rate. Alfred felt moved by Lisa's determination. As soon as she opened her eyes, he immediately said, "Preparations are complete." And he added that his comrades looked too refined because victory awaits them at the end. Finally, the great day arrived, the day of the decisive representative duel. At the beginning, these nobles were lined up next to some pathetic children. They did not stop the fight and continued to attack to make them suffer. As soon as the last one won the match, another nobleman was happy about this. All 3 there remained undefeated. But Charles understood everything immediately. It was he who was laying out the matches. They continuously mocked those boys and Charles only rejoiced. Next to him were 2 troublemakers and quite strong ones at that. Then he announced to his comrades that Alfred's team matches had started. The preparation was already finished. And the first clash was a face-to-face bet between an ordinary boy and a pro who suddenly burst into the class. In the opponent's gaze burned deadly danger. But very quickly he sank to his knees and surrendered instantly, so abruptly that it shocked everyone. Cyrus just laughed, calling it a wise decision, and then left, thanking him for sparing him the need to get his hands dirty. And those 2 noble scoundrels declared that this was absolute nonsense. And then they plunged into a senseless fight. Charles remained as calm as always and announced, the next match Alfred's. This time Alfred found himself face to face with a woman who immediately approached closer. In her pleasant, soothing voice, the tension seemed to truly dissolve. When asked about the reason, she said she knew in advance she would not win that match anyway. Alfred was not one to retreat, so he asked her to try before going down herself. This encouraged her, so she agreed to the match. At the start, Alfred summoned the magic of the 7th tier. They left that girl in complete agony. She thought he would show mercy. But Alfred did not stop and cast spells to hit the lady directly. She was overwhelmed by that magic. Her body seemed to be torn to pieces, and everything was shattered. Even the thugs were shocked by his act until they noticed something in the thin air. Inside that bubble, the referee and the lady suspended in the air. When the magic on the ground faded, the bubble burst and both fell from a certain height. When the referee lay on the ground, he set a rule for them. The one who ends up outside the arena is eliminated. The referee noticed this and declared Alfred the winner. After the fight ended, Ciros was still in training with his master. He understood that their abilities could not compare, but he felt, accepting defeat before the fight is a betrayal of oneself. He knew his master saves the reputation of the students as warriors. Thus, in this style, Alfred was able to snatch victory, and at the same time, maintain the reputation of a warrior. Instead, two thugs were considering their position in case they had to face Alfred without any barrier to protect them. Charles asked them to calm down. He was confident that the team would inevitably fall apart. One thought was enough for him: there would definitely be someone who would lose this match. In his eyes, the main weakness in Alfred's team was Lisa Wilson, and the man standing before her was like a fiery flash was Lydia. But Charles was too confused to think about Alfred and how Ciros could win in such a way. Even the most persistent vagabonds admitted Lydia already had her victories. The candidate from the Slay class had absolutely no chance. When Lisa stood still, she recalled what Alfred said: this test was for promotion. He was sure the opponent would definitely see humiliation in her, and then the enemy would demonstrate absolute superiority. And everything happened exactly as he predicted. But he knew Lisa's special magic belonged to the realm of defense. Lisa did everything possible to stop the attack with magic. At that very moment, she was suddenly struck to shout at full voice so that they would all learn about the use of the 5th tier of magic. This barrier was called the Spirit Guardian Barrier. Alfred was confident there was no student in the entire academy who could break through its protective magic. And it happened just as they expected. Her protective magic simply nullified the attack. Livia was left in complete shock. She did not give herself a moment's pause after neutralization and immediately rushed to the rear of Levia to launch a swift, devastating counterattack. The first moment had not yet disappeared when she cast a 5-tier magic ice fang strike. This striking blow was enough to send Lydia flying swiftly into the sky. Eventually, he ended up outside the arena and lay unconscious, but thanks to Alfred's prophecies and her magic, she secured her first victory. Thereafter, the course of events shifted to Alfred's family home. At Alfred's father's funeral, Ulrin Beryl, they saw him sitting in the cabin. The butler knocked on the door and entered to report. Those were conversations about the young master, but Ulgrin was not interested in any information about him. He had already renounced him as a son. The servant tried again to explain something and nodded towards the promotion exams. Ulgrin was too cold, and he decided his trash son was lost somewhere and this one was just playing at death in the academy. There was no room for failure in his eyes, so he warned the butler, under no circumstances speak of such things. The poor man fell into shock, and when everything was denied, he blurted out his child had brilliantly passed the academic test. Ulgren asked for more details, and the butler explained Alfred could easily control 8th tier magic, and even during rehearsal tests his power was astonishing. Algern found it too difficult to believe such a thing. And then the butler, because of the last arrow, as the director said, reports. The messages indicated that Alfred likely inherited legendary traits passed down from generation to generation. Kazalgar knew their lineage gained noble status back when creatures long ago evolved from the union of humans and demons. The exam schedule for promotion interested him immediately, as soon as Butler announced that the final tournament would take place next week. But Ulgrin instantly asked to cancel all plans. He was already preparing to go there to see his son win the final. He literally shone with joy as soon as he heard that his son was finally recognized as a worthy son. But as soon as the image switched to previous exams, the nobles were gripped by a trembling thought: Alfred's team might break into the final. They had nothing to discuss, only one way remained: to retreat from the fight. But Charles waved it off, saying it will be as destined, and even if the battle fails, his anger will not fade, he will still be targeted. One of them was too worried about what would happen to him specifically, but he knew one thing: they were not the kind to sow chaos. A memory surfaced. It all began with a letter lying on Alfred's table. It depicted how he was abandoned by his family halfway, and the signature was made by a representative who called himself one of the 10 Swords. The next day went the same, and Alfred froze, stunned right before everyone's eyes. In the gaze of the noble pictured criminal, there was not a drop of what revenge should fear. Charles worried about the fate of the person standing behind the 10 blades. In response, he immediately understood. Such an act would have to be paid for with his own life. Charles knew this no less than him, so he tried at all costs to delay the moment until his true identity was revealed. Then the story jumped to the 3rd grade just after the exam. Someone visited Alfred with proud, defiant eyes. It was the same person who earlier denied the very idea, saying she created nothing to fight against Class 1. At that moment, he was already nearby, apologizing to him. He was the one pushing them back as soon as they dared to challenge the top class. He said once again that his sensational comeback was truly impressive. 2 others on the team were also strong, but in his eyes, Alfred was the one who pulled hope for them from the very bottom. And yet he stubbornly believed he could not reach Alfred's level no matter how hard he tried. Finally, he thanked Alfred for the hope and asked him to show him all the best even in the finals. Just as he was about to leave, Alfred accepted the thanks but still asked if he really thought it was impossible to reach his level. And again, that boy saw nothing wrong with it. Alfred had experienced awakening, and Ciro's was a true talent. At that moment, loudly and confidently, they offered it to her and told him that Lisa drinks a secret elixir for that showcase battle, how she showed determination to challenge fate, risking half of her life. That was shocking enough, but Alfred raised the stakes. Ciro was truly a genius. And what made him even more brilliant was his unwavering determination. He already knew that by next week he would win the fight and free the class, giving everyone the freedom they longed for. Talent, as everyone knows, can be unfair. In their world, equality was left only in words, but for everyone there was something else in common: time, and there was enough of it to equalize. So Alfred asked him to decide for himself, seize the chance or lose the sight of hope. He wanted that man to believe in himself and keep the same rhythm. The scene switched to the bulletin board. A new record was already posted along with pairs for the finals. The message specified that it could be reshaped by 10 candidates from the sword list, and everyone knew it was Alfred who could pull this off in the shadows, behind the head of the school. As soon as the other students saw this, they were overwhelmed with horror at the thought of what those conditions would mean for their class. Everywhere, conversations buzzed about the finals, and Charles listened to everything. He realized the principal was also hooked in this story, and everything became clear. This was not just another prank in a fight, but a direct invitation from Alfred to a revenge match. Even when he had grasped all this, he knew one thing: he had nowhere to run. When the scene switched to Class 1, the troublemakers were cornered and relentlessly interrogated, whether they could win the matches and keep the class from even worse positions. Under a hail of continuous questions, one of the troublemakers sharply said no, and everyone immediately echoed the same excuse. Supposedly, the opponent was a monster capable of wielding 8th rank magic. Later, one of the girls praised them and declared that even fools knew winning the match by fair play was impossible. Then she looked with interest and asked if they had any cheap tricks ready. The criminals knew in advance this could not be handled, but she continued giving orders for them to win, just as a great noble lord would have done. They already had enough, so they were ordered to fight on their own, and on their own territory. All the talk eventually boiled down to a senseless fight. In one corner of the seating, someone had no idea about someone else's fascination. Then they told her if those boys lose the match, they will have to switch places with Class 3. And the only meaning of that exchange was terrible: to become slaves, because not a single nobleman remained. And suddenly the aura of the Habsburg daughter changed. She did not want to exchange something like that, so she repeated it again and again. Later it became known, the class that was once completely united was already divided into parts. They fought to avoid becoming slaves. Charles, meanwhile, found himself on the floor, after considering the circumstances he would have to face. A boy came in and asked Charles why he was in such a state. Charles called him an information broker and asked why he appeared here. This boy with a super sharp look threw papers at his feet, showing them as the reason for the sudden changes in Alfred's features. He stumbled upon something truly interesting in the history of the National Library's issuance. The book was lent to Alfred on the day just before he started attending the academy. These books contained recipes for physical enhancement and methods on how to temporarily activate magical powers. But hidden in this was incredible misfortune. It was enough just to try. Charles tried to understand and grasp what exactly was happening. He realized the grimoire of demonic summoning once literally lay on the borderline of forbidden texts. Charles understood that he lacked information about how exactly changes occur within it. The informant told him summoning a demon offers two paths for forging a powerful contract. The first to summon the demon into the mortal world, and the price for this was one soul. The second method consisted in raising the demon's body and becoming a vessel for its ascension into the world. Alfred could use the second method for his purpose, and then Charles suddenly changed his voice, began speaking to him soothingly. There are ways to overcome demons so they really can win. Behind the wall was Clive. He was gnawed by the thought. The Academy might expel him if Alfred wins the final match. He pondered whether it was worth going to the village and teaching second-rate magic for him. It was a terrible torment. And suddenly the director appeared. They were already escorting Clive out, and with surprise at his very appearance. The director was there to warn, if children from the high nobility study in the first grade, then when it comes time to change classes, his relatives and their guardians will settle for nothing less than his head on a platter. He began to tremble, and the director ordered him to prepare for a line of apologies. The director knew the nobility would do everything possible to pull his strings from everywhere. So it all came down to a simple fact. He would be banned from other magical academies in neighboring countries, and he would remain a mage who is simply unimaginable. Clive realized that not only his teaching but everything was under threat. At the end, the director ordered him to prepare for what would soon catch up with him in the near future. Clive froze for a moment. At that very second, he realized his condition right now was almost a death sentence. When the director left, Clive lost all hope. It was then that Charles approached him and asked for a favor. Clive asked if it was about Alfred, since he was not going to get involved in such stories. Charles understood this too, so Clive asked him to understand everything and move on, leaving the problems on his own terms. The member of the 10th Sword was not ready to lose hope and held on to the finals. And he asked Clive to lend him help to enter the Forbidden Library. He was going to visit the library and read something there to the place where ordinary students had no access. Clive froze. Just the thought of what he was about to do made him tremble inside. A student dealing with forbidden texts could face serious criminal charges, and they both knew. There was no time for talks and nonsense. They were on the edge. Charles reminded, if this is not fixed, both he and Clive would be doomed. After some time, Charles gathered everyone in the room and announced, the secret behind Alfred's power has already been revealed. Sometimes this happened to the boy. A demon would possess him. These words were enough to immediately change the atmosphere in the class. In a moment, everyone agreed with his conclusions. Someone knew the truth. To summon a demon means to pay a price. So he trembled even at the thought of what he had given for this demon, while others frantically wondered who had cornered him like this. They were eager to understand exactly how they would approach that event. Charles, keeping calm, explained, no one is grown up enough to call someone an adult, and then he introduced them to his sensei so they could join their plan. As soon as this dirt crossed the threshold, he brought into the realm of death the Book of Invitations, a forbidden volume of demonic spells that the wizard had crossed out 30 years ago. As soon as everyone learned about this, they were overwhelmed with surprise, and there were no longer any thoughts about what to do next. Charles was going to pay back a tooth for a tooth. It is said that if someone summons a demon, they themselves will have to do the same. Calculating the level of magic Alfred used, Charles decided to engage the 9th circle and summon a mid-level demon at the very moment when conditions were right. All present were too excited to think about summoning a mid-level demon and trying to defeat Alfred. However, the one who did not like this idea, a representative of a great family, immediately asked if a ritual spell was needed to summon a mid-level demon, so it turned out a sacrifice was unavoidable. And it was important for her to know, did he mean someone among them? No one wanted to become a sacrifice for a cause that would ultimately turn them into slavery. Charles replied that they really needed help with the ritual. And then he told them not to worry because none of them were on Alfred's revenge list. He thanked those present and asked the offenders to stay, allowing the others to leave. When everyone dispersed, the atmosphere suddenly changed. One of them asked Charles if he wanted someone among them to become the sacrifice. He answered affirmatively. But reveal this in such a way as not to lose your life and share the burden among them. Charles meant each of them would give one hand for the cause. But before he could finish speaking, both of them slowed the pace and asked him to give my call, saying he couldn't even use magic and was completely useless. And this one agreed too. Suddenly Michael burst into the room and everyone was instantly overwhelmed with complete shock. He was here after sneaking out of the estate and came to give the demon both legs. Neither of the two could believe what they heard. He added, life was almost over, so the legs would no longer be useful. Even then, the partner held on to the simplest needs, and he really did not want to move his legs. Moreover, he even mocked Chad, saying that he couldn't move because he was sitting in a cell. And there his life was nothing more than a toy for a show. Every other day the commoners amused themselves with him. This inspiration was only for one thing: they asked for their hands as sacrifices and calmed down while they still lived in society. Danny's asked him why he was so fixated on Alfred. Michael answered them, the reason is that Alfred is the only cause thanks to which their life turned into hell. His voice tightened nerves more and more with every second, so he forced himself to go on. If he was about to lose the ability to walk again, they both would have to choose: either live with one hand, or live their life like Chad or like himself. Since then, they both understood the task, and Charles asked them to remember this moment, the very one where the script for Alfred's slaughter would later be written. The event was already at the doorstep, about to begin, and Michael was ready to give everything he had for this cause. He was going to repay every single pain that tormented him. They all also demanded intervention from Chad, so Charles clarified that he had also done his part after revealing the place where he kept all his money. Charles was going to use this money to ask the criminal guild to kidnap Lisa Wilson. They were arranging this to break Alfred's heart completely. Charles watched everything closely from afar and enjoyed the moment. Everything was going exactly as he had planned. He pushed the teacher to commit a crime to get the forbidden texts, and then lured those 3 offenders to perform the sacrifice needed to summon the demon. He was happy he remained completely unharmed, even though he was the main instigator of the whole affair. Charles controlled all the puppets in his bets. How can someone be so stupid as to think about catching the king? On the other hand, Alfred was calmly reading a book, while Cyrus was bowing before him, begging for forgiveness. In fact, Lisa had already been taken to the criminal guild, even though the reason for forgiveness was supposed to be the one Cyrus provided as a guard. Then Alfred pondered, whose mind could outsmart Kira's mind since their methods lacked no mastery. In his eyes, this filth after the girl's kidnapping for his own pleasure had lost all shyness. The protagonist immediately asked Kira to move forward. When Cyrus, unable to find peace, asked if everything would be fine if they acted according to the letter they received, we all knew Alfred never intended to follow the script. What gnawed at him was Different had no intention of settling this elegantly. If any of them so much as touched Lisa with a finger, he would break each one of them. In the staff room, meanwhile, a completely different story was unfolding. The director informed the others, just reminded how Alfred, as an example, was sent to Magic Academy to assess his power. Clyde was more worried that everything could turn into a disaster, so the director revealed, the details still remain unclear, but judging by the test results. While one of the 3 wise men, the famous holy burning Isabella, was to be present, the staff could not believe it and was puzzled about what exactly led her to the school match. The director could do nothing. All that remained was to wait for reports from the capital. But what gnawed at them most was something else: how to deal with Alfred. Then the scenes were moved to the place where, according to rumors, they worshipped the devil. This was a land soaked with the blood of Maniand, where the black man remained in sight for far too long. Teleportation to that location was impossible at any time, but our protagonist is a creature of a completely different kind, not human. During the interrogation, he was already there immediately after the news about the purchase of chickens, pigs, marijuana, and heroin. Moreover, they did not feel any movement of the members of the criminal guild, so it became clear the exchange was already completed. Alfred gathered all the news, even the one that people were currently summoning some demons. Cyrus was still worried how he managed to squeeze so much information in such a short time. Alfred revealed that the reason was his old attempt to practice espionage. Cyrus quickly realized, from the reserves they had, they could call a mid-level demon and then it would no longer be a problem. But the experienced person later warned Cyrus, relying on assumptions is deadly dangerous, and reminded him of the time when he got stuck against the Minotaur after he did not. The guild misjudged the provided information about the request. Eventually, he entered the mansion and told him, even a lion gives everything when hunting a mouse. In that villa, everything he uncovered was kept inside as a sacrifice. The students participated in the formation of this ritual, but Lisa was thrown far away. She completely lost consciousness. The bullies quickly realized that the place was not suitable for them. They lacked the skill to complete the task. The conversation dragged on and the guy objected. He did not rush home without doing anything. Then he ordered another to look at his own feet, pointing at Lady Lisa so that he would allow her to manage to play with her to his heart's content. Their perversion grew every minute. The longer they looked at her, the more it inflamed them before this performance. Then they undressed her with their hands, and then decided to go to the banquet. Fate had prepared something else for them again. Alfred flew in there and drove that freak into the wall, and broke all the bones in his body. Alfred apologized to Lisa for holding her in such a place with such a disgusting smell. He decided to quickly hush up this matter. As soon as Mikkel heard this, he immediately rolled out of the room in his wheelchair. Tell him that it is right there that he will meet his death. And Alfred, on the contrary, was in a bad mood, so he demanded to bring everything they had at their disposal immediately. All three confirmed once again, if he asks, they will gather to him together. Cyrus pondered that Michael was there too, and Michael ordered him to pull himself together. As soon as he saw it after the ritual they were performing right at that moment, no longer had to ask such questions. The ritual cracked to the right in an instant, and both thugs began losing one hand each, cursing Alfred to take him to hell. This sacrifice was enough for the ritual to work. And Nofred knew this was not enough, even more would be needed. He was right again at the very moment when the demon's spell was just beginning to end. Mechel also began losing both legs, cursing Alfred. The protagonist went to fight, but Cyrus asked him to give this part of the fight to him. This was not something he could handle, and Kairos understood that well too. He barely managed to maintain 7th tier magic. So he set challenges for himself in order to ultimately achieve a good result. Alfred really wanted to know what exactly he was aiming at. So Cyrus told him this directly, essentially being here is pure humiliation, but he just wants to stay close. He remembered all the magic the guild master demonstrated, so he was sure there is no one but him to whom he can dedicate his life. Alfred realized one thing: he wanted to be familiar to him, although in his entire life he never had any such acquaintance. Thanks to this announcement, he gave Cyrus the opportunity to take the lead in battle, and immediately warned, do not intervene even in the event of absolute death. Eventually, he allowed Cyrus to come in and show what he had obtained. When the battle began, Cyrus felt an absurd level of magical power in this dreadful aura. Standing still, he already realized, relaxing even for a second would mean death. He moved forward, ascending towards him, propelling himself with 6-tiered magic explosive fireball barrage. The strike landed exactly at the devil's feet. As soon as Michael noticed this, he saw Cyrus had hidden in the smoke screen. For him, this was not a problem. The devil did not rely solely on sight. Instead, Cyrus took advantage of the screen to sneak behind the devil. But just as he was about to launch an attack, the devil immediately sensed his presence. And then they ran into that man from zero distance. The guys were laughing, that's the end. But this happiness was not long-lasting. It was not Cyrus, but a 6-tier magical illusion ghost. Both the demon and the wanderers froze in shock. Behind the demon himself, the real man was still unnoticed. He hoped that his additional mana would catch and move that illusory action. At that moment, he was already preparing to attack the demon with his magical enhancement. At that moment, something unexpected happened. The devil managed to feel the strike. This time, Cyrus had no defense. The devil caught the moment and subdued our side actor, pressing him back into the ground. My challenge was interrupted by a moment of shadowy fury of battle. And then he even laughed at Kira's. He decided that he could defeat a mid-level demon having a 6-tier magical level. His joy crumbled again as soon as the smoke cleared. Cyrus stood in the path of that strike, focused on the sweat and blood he had given to training. None of them could believe what was happening at that moment. But this is not the end. Kir, without losing determination, rolled out the attack he had been preparing since the very beginning of the fight. It was a perfect punch right in the face of the average demon. Cyrus's physical abilities had a base score of 80, a passing grade, and even the great sage himself praised it. The blow that hit the demon in the face instantly reshaped his appearance. The enraged demon did not hesitate. He immediately lunged at the man who was the center of attention. This time he did not have the courage to move, so the great sage came there himself to save his student. He knocked Cyrus down from a distance. There they asked him for help. At first he refused, deciding, until he passes the exam, he will not ask for any help. But Ulfur told him that he was his student, so he could really do something for him. After that, Ulfur took him Lisa and ordered her to just wait until everything was sealed. His movement was so fast that Michael did not even have time to see. He continuously mocked the man as if he could stop what was already inevitable. Then he told even more. He called the demon Ardos, who recently devoured the souls of 200 soldiers. My call is really not in his mind, and he relentlessly forced me to listen, to look at Cyrus's condition. His words drove into the protagonist's hearts like needles. He could not call his student a useless loafer. The latter, already knowing that he could not defeat the opponent in this fight, still rushed to attack the devil. While he was lost in thought, Michael incessantly babbled pure nonsense in his mouth. Tell the great sage to kneel and apologize to him. But even after the apology, he was not going to deviate from the plan and had already decided. The punishment would be death. Because wolves always stick in packs, so someone sneaked up from behind. Putting himself in the role of a teacher who enjoys saying that phrase, he realized he was not alone. The whole class surrounded him. Clive was there to see Alfred die in that terrible grave situation. Everyone there laughed ominously and reshaped the surroundings into pure horror, no different from when Alfred was bullied in front of everyone, and everyone liked it. In the sage's gaze, it was utterly disgusting. Then the demon spoke and called him a small, worthless wizard from humanity. He demanded the protagonist to pour all his power into a single strike, wanting to see what he was capable of. At first, Alfred was stunned when he heard him speak, and then he asked what was the reason for such generosity. That generosity was based on two things: the presence of that person and their confidence. He asked again, let the person hit him as hard as they could. The main character also did not lower the bar, and as soon as the time came, he struck himself, an attack that grew from a single finger. That was enough to pierce the demon's stomach through and through. And then red water splashed fragments of his accomplice right in the devil's face on the bald head. Not only him, the whole class as one, and the teacher too, stood speechless. The demon lay on the floor. After one blow, he could no longer get up. And my call made me guess that this would happen. When he saw a mid-level demon killed with one blow, he burst out screaming. He screamed endlessly from shock, lying on the floor without legs, and had no chance to understand what exactly had happened. Charles, on the other side, at first was going to call the court guards, but eventually changed his mind and decided to summon a mid-level demon. He was furious to a mad state, no longer thinking whether Alfred's strength was greater than the knight's. It was then that Alfred said something to Mikkel. He voiced a period of 6 months and 23 days and asked if he understood what that number meant. Mikkel could not comprehend. It was the time when the true owner of that body suffered from their bullying. Alfred introduced himself, the executor of his own revenge, and then decided that Michael should also feel as much time as that boy had suffered. It was then that he used 9th level magic to summon a gate from another world. After that, he told Michael, behind that gate he held creatures of nightmarish horror. Michael recognized in it a plant monster, the one that devours people to feed on them. The protagonist had a top-tier pet, Shadow Flora. As punishment, after capturing a person, Shadow Flora relentlessly torments them with the most terrible nightmares. In reality, the boundary between how a soul turns into an empty shell is 6 months. And if they do not come down, they will have to carry deep scars in their hearts for life. No sooner had he sent Michael alone than he returned to the others and decided to doom them to the same fate. They all called it complete madness, supposedly living in hell. Alfred cast a deathly glance at them, asking if they themselves had not been the first to do so. The troublemakers realized this is pure hell and it is utter nonsense. But on the other hand, Charles smiled and immediately clapped his hands for Alfred, praising what he had done. When McCall asked to find another way to save them, he told about its existence and then asked everyone to unite and help with this. Everyone nodded, agreeing, because they were ready for anything just to get out of there. Charles asked again if they could avert this, even if it meant risking their lives. From these words, it was as if they were all covered by an icy horror. Before anyone could respond, Michael immediately objected. And then he ordered everyone to take Alfred to hell with them. He needed blood for his own revenge. Charles smiled sincerely. He knew the contract was already sealed. So this was exactly what he was aiming for. The magical circle for summoning was masterfully completed. So even if they managed to offer sacrifices on a larger scale, they would still be able to use the ultimate magic. That bastard was really preparing to summon a higher-level demon with his preparations. Suddenly, Mike began sifting through thoughts about his life. He felt a pain that no one had ever experienced. Not only him, several other students also began to lose self-control. Clyde froze in shock as soon as he saw he had sacrificed all his classmates. He did it because each of them was noble, so even if someone was left behind, they could avoid execution. Before Alfred's eyes, Michael died, and yet Alfred had no intention of doing anything like that at all. Then Charles told him that he felt the same way about their classmates. He also never intended to take anyone's life. These words struck the hero's head. It turns out it was he himself from the very beginning who was behind the whole plan. Charles also praised his abilities, the skill to recognize a person of honor without fail at first glance. When Alfred asked why he was so persistently pursuing him, he replied, no matter how much he crammed, Alfred still got a higher position thanks to his noble origin. Alfred, for his part, did not remember that he had ever treated him badly even once. And even more, he was sincerely convinced they were best friends. But one day Alfred lost control. He wanted to prove that this was not friendship he was forced by his parents. His family dreamed of seeing in him a loyal partner, so in the end he abandoned his family for revenge. But suddenly he was enlightened. The time had come. He summoned a demon named Blade of the Demon King, Abaddon. This time allowed no jokes. The monster that broke out belonged to those with whom one does not joke. Charles completely lost his mind and thought only of the revenge he had been nursing all these years. Finally arrived the blade of one of the demon lords, the god-killing demonic dragon. Clive belonged to those who could not believe what was happening. He insisted that it was truly impossible. Ofer did not flinch even once, and he immediately recognized the demon as Nebula Minion, one of the 5 Deathblade gods. This information was such that even Charles could not comprehend it. And then the demon suddenly spoke and said, "This name is recognized only by the 5 arch-gods and friends." Charles could not find words. Ofer had just laughed at that dragon, stating that it was probably useless to anyone, a person of no great importance. Then the dragon began to sweat profusely and continued. Finally, he saw in Alfred the majestic archmage Cedric. Suddenly both spoke casually, and the monster began to ask him to visit for some time. Charles still remained quiet. He could not believe that he was standing before a man whom even a demon dragon calls master. And simply put, he was standing before the supreme sage of the heavens. He could not comprehend a single thing, so later confirmed it himself, from Alfred himself, about his true identity. Alfred finally named himself Cedric, the supreme sage, and said that he had simply been reborn in this body. Charles could not believe such a level of rebirth, but he immediately remembered that this man is the only sage in human history who has reached such a level. All events up to the moment when Lenz began to do everything perfectly finally formed into one clear picture. He immediately dropped to his knees and only then realized even the demon was on the man's side. It was then that he told him, if he wants to win, let him summon the Lord of Demons himself. Charles called it complete nonsense, saying that the demon lord would not pay attention to the call of an ordinary mortal. Ofer saw nothing wrong with this but still asked to summon someone stronger. If Abaddon had been talking about agreements with their first for 20 years then Charles finally understood everything and laughed in despair, telling himself that this was probably the great sage Cedric simply from the heavens. The sage was not going to leave unpunished when someone cornered young Alfred, kidnapped Lisa, and stabbed 30 of their classmates. Justice was decided to be delivered at any moment. To do this, he used magic and threw a knife right in front of himself while Charles continued to wait until justice would be punished. But he could not understand what this meant, so he said, "This is the only mercy I can offer. Decide, do I use it or not?" After he took the average lifespan of his classmates, the second punishment for him was 50 years. He took a life equivalent to 1,600 years, and the suffering of Shadow Flora became a continuous nightmare for another 5 years. Charles truly understood. In Cedric's dictionary there was no and would be no place for mercy. The explanation about mercy was then clear, but again he was asked to end life with honor. Or he would accept the second punishment to endure suffering from the Shadow Flora. He gave him a chance to choose his own fate. Trembling with pain, he decided to use the knife. He looked at his reflection in the blade and immediately began to beg for forgiveness from Cedric. He seized that excuse about how Alfred remembers them as friends. He was firmly convinced Alfred would not do anything terrible to his best friend and would stand by him, support his side. Cedric retorted, complete nonsense to ask for forgiveness without showing any resistance. He cursed incessantly while picking up his swords. Soon the shadow floor shed its tentacle shadows, and he begged with his whole body for it to wait at least a moment. While he was being dragged, Cedric gathered himself and uttered the same words he once said when Alfred needed him the most. Alfred said goodbye to him and asked never to cross paths in this place again. Eventually, he was mercilessly covered by Flora. That same night, the director inspected this place along with the rest of the staff, and he saw the clothes of 30 students all bloodied. Everything was neatly folded except for the demon's corpse. The director could not believe his eyes. What happened knocked him off balance and left him completely bewildered. They could not understand why exactly at that moment the students were calling the demon and called it pure nonsense. One of the employees came across Clive, sprawled in the corner of the room, and began interrogating whether he was even here. So many questions piled up that everyone had to look for answers, and first of all, they managed to find out who laid out the student uniforms. It was then that Clyde told them that the students were summoning demons from the forbidden text, and he was so scared that he didn't manage to realize. At that moment, each of them was already dead. Clive was at a loss for words, while the other teachers insisted that this was a matter of responsibility. After all, his class was full of nobility. They did not relent for a moment, again and again demanding answers and interrogating whether he really meant that he was the one who did it. He explained to them that it was Alfred who defeated the mediocre demon, and to him it sounded as easy as a piece of cake. When consciousness left him, he could no longer remember what actually happened next. Other staff told him that they rushed there immediately after the report from the 3rd grade. He assumed maybe Charles also lost consciousness like him, so the dragon demon should have devoured him. But the anxiety had another reason why he was even alive there at all. He pulled the book outside, and since everyone was dead, the responsibility fell squarely on him. But he tried to pull himself together and immediately thought up a cheap trick to get out of this trap. However, now it would no longer work. The principal had taken hold of him. He declared that if everything was already out of his control, he would be handed over to the police knights, and most likely, his sentence would be only one: beheading. As soon as he heard this, his mind seemed to shut down, and laughing at himself, he grabbed his own neck with his own hand. Then the action shifted back to the same day in the palace. Someone was talking about Isabella's taste until she asked about the flesh of a child around the age of 12. Isabella saw nothing wrong with this after all. It was there that she was sheltered. This was the same man who deceived our Cedric Ammon. He whispered to her that even commoners are capable of seeing, and that she always prowls for fresh young flesh for the sacrifice. Then Isabella reminded him about the next day's visit to the Magic Academy, calling it sheer nonsense without a shadow of doubt. It was then that he retorted to her, "The highest sage is searching for the laws of reincarnation." So it was entirely possible that for this very reason he so easily swallowed the poison that time. They knew for sure, if this is true, the Supreme Sage has already been reborn. Then there must be a reason why he will die at this very moment. Or, according to Isabella's understanding, he had some kind of insurance. Reincarnation, it turns out, was supposed to mean that he would be restarted anew like a baby, and Ammon knew, better to be safe than sorry later. So they needed to confirm this young man, to prevent events from following the worst-case scenario. Ammon remembered, if he makes a comeback, they are obliged to remove the sprout before it turns into a small plant. She felt that he was overcautious then, but still asked him to give her some space, let her passion bloom. Ammon, like a true gentleman, immediately left the room and asked her to enjoy the moment she loved. Isabella immediately called the new girl, let her be the first target. Cruelty crossed the line when she threw wine on her legs and forced her to taste it. The poor little one crawled to her feet, then began licking the wine from her socks. She enjoyed everything at the peak and was glad that Ammon had left. Now she could do whatever she wanted. After that task, she asked the girl to come to her, then led her straight to her room. The room was completely covered with red marks, so the beast demanded that the little child live in the same room with him. Finally, the day of the final came. Allegren was about to go out. After the incident with the demon that turned all progress upside down, he still kept his fighting spirit. It was good that his son won in the absence of an opponent, but Allegren insisted a victory is a victory. He also heard that Isabella had arrived at the award ceremony. He was truly incredibly pleased to see Isabella with his own eyes at Magic Academy. Then he asked the butler if that didn't bring back memories of that story, and the butler answered affirmatively. He had seen how weak Alfred was and how he recovered from that. Allegren did not miss a single opportunity for the first time in a long time to praise his child. He was going to engrave the highest masterpiece of their family in memory. The judge-servant could no longer endure it, so, forgiving, he inquired, had they renounced Ulford before, and did Allegren really consider Ulford's feelings? This became a true revelation for that man. But he got so heated and called the butler a commoner, declaring that this question was disrespectful. The servant calmed down a little, and that man still mocked him, calling him a fool for not understanding how the nobility really works. In his eyes, it was not the first time, as if something that fell into the dirt of the earth rises back to the heavens. In the end, he concluded, in such a state they cannot make any complaints. The serf knew from the very beginning that he would act this way. Meanwhile, that man was going to extend his connections to Isabella and therefore called a doctor there. When she appeared, he asked her to tell the chambermaid to prepare 5 gold bars as a gift. The servant was completely confused as soon as he heard this. The gold ingots were indeed what they had been saving to save the farmers from hunger. It was an urgent concern, but in Allegra's eyes, it looked nothing like the same trust had to be earned and a connection established. He was already about to make a proper acquaintance, so in his eyes, a small gift would not hurt anyone. When the scene returned to the school again, the director explained to Cedric that he had been transferred from the educational institution. Cedric took it as a good sign. With so many deaths among the nobility, expulsion from the academy almost seemed like a lucky coincidence. He apologized, sincerely considering himself guilty. But the director definitely knew. Everything had gone this way because of his own fault. He understood that he should not have taken on this slay class matter at all. The director deserved such a result after all. He had taken responsibility for its launch. Then he continued speaking to Cedric. As soon as he saw his strength, he immediately felt deep respect. It was then that he was finally convinced in the future, Cedric would definitely change the academy's work. As expected, Cedric completed the task so quickly that his pace noticeably exceeded even his own expectations. Eventually, he summed up with words that he sincerely prides himself on this man. It was then that Alfred decided to help that old man in his matter. He knew specialization in headmaster magical toxicology. And moreover, he knew that his most famous work was dedicated to how to neutralize poison using barrier magic. The director was shocked. How could a student of such a level understand something like this? Cedric said nothing more, only reported that there is a man named Throater, captain of the police knights, and he is looking for an exceptional toxicologist. Everything was spinning in the director's head, but Cedric pulled back and gave him, let it be like a recommendation for the position. Then the camera switched to the concert hall and everyone there was clapping. The focus was on 3 from Class 3. They not only won the match but also crushed slavery into oblivion. From the very beginning it was clear they were on a completely different level, and each of them was already climbing the stairs during this. Amid all this hustle, his father called Alfred. He was proud that he made the whole hall celebrate for him, raising his voice again about his faith to touch the name of the funeral family and show the world what a brilliant bloodline they have. Alfred said not a word, so he asked himself, why is he so silent, and decided that the son should bow his head before the parents, accepting the praise that he received from them. Then I will turn to the butler and ask him a question. It was exactly about who stands next to him. Olgren was confused and could not find words for this question. How could Alfred remember a person like him if he told the boy that he was disowned? He remembered the man who told the protagonist his existence in the family was completely erased. And it was an unconditional order. He was not brushed off, postponed, or nullified. Alfred neglected the old agreement and abruptly sprang from his place. Olgren fell into despair. He had no idea whether he was really ignoring him. He trembled when the boy so easily dismissed his own father. Isabella, who sat on the throne for the first time, Alfred could not even imagine that he would meet her exactly like that. All 3 received a certificate of achievement, and Lisa Wilson shone the brightest. Then the director asked everyone to stand for Alfred's ovation and addressed the wise Saint Isabella of the 3 saints to deliver a welcoming speech. She was primarily interested in what truly lay behind Alfred's sudden rise to supreme power. She walked closer and closer. He kept staring, trying to find out the reason. She scolded the young man in front of everyone, and a witch's expression froze on her face. Alfred felt it just as always. He was the first to teach her to study the opponent's possibilities in order to break through his weak spots. In fact, he used the technique of magical concealment so that witch decided he was such a weakling and not even worth barging in for anything. But before she could leave, she was struck by his appearance and she asked if he wanted to join the evening she was hosting. She felt she needed to ask the man head of the family if she could sew off his son for one night. Algren seized this golden moment and was already receiving consent as if everything had long been prepared. Hot stories of Lady Isabella swirled in his head, so he thought, if Alfred was capable of surrendering to love that night, the status of the burial family will sharply increase. Again, destiny scribbled something else, so Alfred immediately refused the invitation. From that refusal, the father was at a loss for words. He incessantly scolded his son for brushing off his orders as if nothing had happened. What worried him most was something else. His own son was ignoring him. No father could endure that. When Isabella asked why she was refused, Alfred replied that he lacked experience with women. The man mocked that witch right in front of her face and she felt it. Eventually she said that it was precisely then that she did not need him. Gofford felt this was like an exchange she had already anticipated. but at this pace he was sure his role as the other would disappear. Later, Isabella asked to be released from there, while the director repeatedly detailed to her the preparations for the lavish banquet in her honor. She left smiling at their food. There was simply nothing else for them. When everything settled down a bit, Alfred told Cyrus that he had always sought a chance to understand them, but everything happened too suddenly. There was no need to save the boy's soul, it was time to act. Cyrus was burning with impatience to find out when Alfred would strike the three wise men. Cedric denied that it was not yet time, because earlier he was stronger by only about 1/10 of what he became at his peak. Kairos was caught off guard feeling this. Everything he had done so far was only 1/10. And at that very moment, he felt that they were finally able to overcome the three wise men. And Cedric said to him again, if it were Isabella, everything could have been done simply then. But he knew the next battle against those who remained was hanging by a thread, so he waited until his best force returned and only then prepared for the attack. Eventually, he ordered his subordinate to ensure there was no shortage of papers they needed to submit to the university for further assignment to the north, including Lisa. The subordinate agreed, but asked if Lisa was allowed to have a concession in this. Indulgence was based on the belief, if she drinks and he is not nearby, life will be at risk within 2 weeks. But even in reality, if they managed to avoid even 50 chance of instant death, she would still pay a colossal price for her new power. And then Lisa bursts into the moment and orders them both, just go to the buffet, it is so delicious, and the food was already waiting for them at that very second. Both shuddered and turned pale, as if she did not even suspect what was happening in her head. Cedric suddenly realized the very moment had come, it was finally time for her to find out everything. And then he told her the whole story, from beginning to end. She was struck that Alfred was even capable of this after all. He seemed not to know how. This confused her because she answered in fragments, so he continued the story, although in reality, the identity of Lord Alfred is Cedric, the Supreme Sage. It is simply impossible to swallow this news. As was expected, she immediately began to cut off even the slightest possibility that it would happen. Cyrus knew this would be a sharp blow for her. But the matter was not only about shock for her, it was a 440-volt current. Even the great sage Cedric asked her to calm down because she would not survive if she continued to react the same way. After that, Cyrus asked him about the news regarding his leaving the academy. He replied that he would go to visit an old acquaintance, as he first had to settle matters with Isabel and regain his peak strength as soon as possible. He knew there was still time before the sacrifice to be given to the demon. And even Cyrus was impressed how it was possible to defeat Isabel, yet he still tried to remain fully prepared for any scenarios. Cedric responded with agreement. He insisted that victory with a colossal advantage was the only thing that mattered to him. Later, all three found themselves at the place for carriages. One of the riders informed him that due to dangerous monsters lurking nearby, they would have to travel together with the caravan, like Remora. Alfred agreed, and they were immediately seated inside the caravan. Finally, they set off on the road. Lisa caught the landscapes outside the carriage window with her gaze. And Cedric announced that they were about to enter the domain of Dragonkin, the icy northern borders of Val Norlis. Lisa was worried. I wonder if it was really safe, given how many times it had been struck in the recent past. It was then that Cyrus whispered to her, since the dragon was defeated by Lord Cedric, it had been calm. And Lisa, for her part, caught the thought at that moment. All this time she had to travel alongside a very serious person. From this feeling, it was as if she was pushed right into the whirlpool of a real adventure, and she burned with one desire, to prove to everyone, even commoners, that they too could become imperial sorceresses. Just as Cedric had done, her eyes flashed with the dream of reaching the highest in the world. Cyrus added that everything had changed in this area. Now people had begun attacking the dragon tribes. After a few more clarifications, it became clear. As soon as the Dragonkin, who once held on to the very peaks, lost the ability to transform their precious dragon stones, they began to be robbed. Armed people took the dragon stones and turned them into slaves for themselves. In Alfred's eyes, if the Dragonkin were fierce and invincible warriors, then there could be no reasons for conflicts at all, since Micaldera had already been defeated. But the real explanation of why everything started and rolled on turned out to be simple. Behind everything they went through stood Isabel. The open display of cruelty from both shocked and, as always, the main character found nothing elegant in it, forcing people to exhaust themselves for the sake of their own twisted amusement. It was then that the carriage broke loose at the stop, and the passengers were immediately thrown down. It seemed something was wrong. As soon as Cyrus stepped out of the carriage, he saw a man ordering the amateurs to keep their distance. After the investigation, it became known a pack of monsters attacked them. That man was from a mercenary squad. He came to help the caravan people, and in conversations he showed arrogance and claimed that he supposedly helped students from the academy. The horde was a pack of orcs. Lisa knew someone from the Magic Guild would handle this, but a student from the Magic Academy would not. But when she got to the bottom of it, dived deeper into her thoughts, she realized she was already a fool, even having full knowledge.